Good evening, and welcome to Focal's Featured Speakers Series. The Friends of the College Library was officially launched on 1st of July 1993 by persons from Bermuda College alumni, faculty, and student body. In these times of challenge and change, libraries certainly need all the friends they can get. This Friends group currently and the Friends board members of the past have provided additional support to Bermuda College's library by enriching the collected resources and facilities of the library, by also fostering closer relations between the college's library and the community, and by promoting knowledge of the library's functions, resources, and services. This evening, Focal is grateful and pleased to present our featured speaker, Mr. Craig Simmons, who attended West End School, where he acquired a sound foundation in reading, mathematics, and science. He is senior lecturer in economics at Bermuda College. He holds a Master of Arts in economics. Some of his perspectives on varied topics have been published in Pillars, a journal of the Division of Liberal Arts and Science, and feature our economic pie when 10% is more than 90%. A note on regulatory reform: has the FAR outlived its usefulness? Why Bermuda dollars trade at par with US dollars. Mr. Simmons has served in various capacities off campus, including being member of the Energy Commission 2012. This body regulated the price of electricity. Member of Spending and Government Efficiency, the SAGE Commission of 2013, which recommended ways for government to save money. Member of the Blue Ribbon Panel 2017, which considered if the airport redevelopment project was a good deal for Bermuda. Member of the Board of Directors of Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, years between 2017-2018, which helped small businesses to get off the ground. Since November 2015, Mr. Simmons has provided an opinion to the Fiscal Responsibility Panel on various challenges facing the economy as a part of its annual assessment of the government's debt reduction strategy. He has also been member of the Tax Reform Commission of 2018, which suggested some new taxes and ways of making Bermuda's tax system fairer and more efficient. He has also been consultant to Bermuda First 2019, a think tank trying to come up with ways to jumpstart Bermuda's economy. He is also a contributing author to Offshore Commercial Law in Bermuda, published 2018, which was edited by former Chief Justice Ian Kawley. Currently, Mr. Simmons is a member of the Wage Commission, 2020 and current. This body will recommend a minimum wage and a living wage to the government. At this point in time, it is my pleasure and privilege on behalf of Focal, I do serve on its board, to invite Mr. Simmons to have the floor. Thereafter, we will have questions which you are invited to post. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tolerem, for that introduction. I don't want this to be a lecture, like a public lecture. It was sold to me as a conversation between myself, Professor Tolerem, and the public. And so that's the way I want to sort of fashion the discussion tonight, make it a real discussion. So I've just got a couple of things I suppose I want to say, and then we'll open it up to questions. So my basic thesis, it's pretty simple. I'll share my screen with you just so that you can see what's on my mind. The topic: how will Bermuda's economy fare in a COVID-19 world? Well, my basic thesis is that Bermuda's economic prospects, they're yoked to the health of our people. More specifically, I mean, if you want to operationalize it, we could say that our economic prospects are yoked to infection rates. So when infection rates rise, our prospects decline. And when infection rates fall, our economic prospects increase. And I think this is not something that's unique to Bermuda. It's a phenomenon that's being observed around the world, that what we're in right now, this pandemic, is first and foremost a health problem. And so a year ago, our government and governments around the world essentially sent their economies into recession, which is arguably the first time governments have consciously created a recession. And because they understood that health first, then comes economy. Now, a year on, I think people are they're weary of this idea. But I would argue that we need to keep this idea that the two are yoked, and health comes first, economy comes second. Now, that means, if we're going to address the health concerns, a major part of addressing the health concerns will be reaching herd immunity. And so if you're talking about 3/4 of the population getting there, a large part of that is vaccination. And that in and of itself creates a major problem because of the lack of trust that I think the community has with the medical establishment, especially the Black community. We just need to think about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment that went on for quite some time, I think 1932 to 1972. I mean, that's a scary idea where these men were allowed to, suffer from syphilis. Another would be Henrietta Lacks, where this woman, born I think in the 1930s, she passed I think 31 years old from cancer, but they discovered that her cells were unique. They labeled them as immortal, and those cells were essentially stolen from her. Her family got zero benefit from it. And so within the Black community, there is understandably reservations about getting vaccinated, about following the suggestions of the medical fraternity. And these are serious concerns. They shouldn't be dismissed. And I, as someone who got vaccinated, I need to remember that these fears are real, and that we need to respect them, and that, well, how do we build the trust between the medical fraternity and the rest of the community? So that is a project that needs to be addressed very quickly, because coming back to my thesis here, that our economic prospects are yoked to the health of our people. And I am linking the health of our people to our people getting vaccinated. And that vaccination is our best option for reaching herd immunity, so that we can in fact protect those who can't get vaccinated. So getting over that hurdle, it needs, as I said, the cooperation of about 40,000 people. We are still quite some distance away from that. And so the spikes that we're seeing now won't go anywhere. The other thing is that closely related to it is the idea of healthcare. That not so long ago, I think it was common for people to believe that healthcare was a private good. I would like to think that this pandemic has made it abundantly clear that healthcare is no longer or can no longer be considered a private good. It is, in fact, a public good. My health is, let's use the word, yoked to your health.
Yes.
And we have about 5,000 people in Bermuda who are uninsured. And what we need to think about, how are we going to get these people under the umbrella of the healthcare system? If you want to talk about cost, well, one sort of blunt way of calculating the cost would be to say, all right, so these 5,000 people, we bring them under the umbrella of healthcare by offering them the hospital insurance program, HIP. That particular program costs about $400 a month. So in a year, we're talking approximately $5,000, and we're talking $5,000 for 5,000 people. Price tag, $25 million. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, or maybe it does. But within the context of a government that's struggling to keep the lights on, $25 million is not a small amount of money. But I throw that $25 million number out there just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the problem. And this is something that would become like an annual dues, if you will, for giving people access. So we've debated the issue of universal access to healthcare in the past, and it didn't go very well. But I think the pandemic gives it a different spin, that we cannot hide away and expect to protect ourselves from a pandemic. It is a public good, very much like mosquito control. So everybody on this call, if you're in Bermuda, is consuming mosquito control. It's a public good. Now, the government could have said, well, get yourself a can of off spray. And if you want to repel mosquitoes, well, do it yourself. Buy off or some other mosquito repellent, and you're on your own. But the government, in its wisdom, understood that that wasn't something that was possible. And so they created Vector and spent a lot of money getting rid of mosquitoes in Bermuda. I would argue that the pandemic is on that level where it's going to take a change of mindset. And the obvious change is from healthcare being a private good to healthcare being a public good, and then figuring out about how you're going to pay for it. So that's the first thing. I think keeping health at the center of our thinking about economic recovery. The economic recovery is not possible until we get those infection rates down. And I'm arguing that the best way to get those infection rates down is through vaccination. Thinking about the employment outlook, and given that we're dealing with a communicable disease and how that's going to shape how we get people back to work and how we in fact work going forward. So here are some characteristics of the kind of work that has seen and will see the greatest economic impact. So work that has people in close physical contact, either to customers or coworkers. Those sectors have been most affected, as has sectors that have to deal with human interactions on an ongoing basis, which would help explain why the hospitality industry, we're talking here now, hotels, guest houses, restaurants, and bars, have really borne the brunt of the negative economic impact of this pandemic. The third bullet, whether those interactions are in with a small set of colleagues or an ever-changing stream of strangers. And this is where people that work with computers, they can very quickly pivot and sort of solve that problem by isolating themselves from customers. I think I fall into that particular category. Working indoors is particularly precarious, which would help explain why the construction industry has been able to bounce back relatively quickly, and why it will continue to sort of grow and in fact provide the capital projects that the government is keen to get on with. And then whether or not your work requires on-site presence. With me, I can sit here from the comfort of my home and teach and talk to you. And so going forward, addressing these concerns, how we choose to address those concerns, will have a lot to do with how quickly we get ourselves onto the new normal, not back to normal, because I don't think there is any going back. It's about adapting, taking what we've learned from the last 12 months and using that which is sustainable. That's important, because many of us, I think, understand that the last 12 months, the rate at which we've been working is not sustainable, and that we do need to move toward that new normal. And so that requires us to sort of appreciate that we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. This table is intended to make that clear. And the boats can be broadly defined as, well, a blue collar boat and a white collar boat. People that work in blue collar sectors have been disproportionately affected by it. Hotels and restaurants, remembering that those 4,600 people that work in hotels and restaurants, in the hotel sectors, the majority of those people would have been Bermudian. Sort of between 75 and 80% of the folks in the hotel industry would have been Bermudian. But restaurants, it was sort of a 50-50 split. And many of the non-Bermudians in that particular sector are no longer on island, which in fact presents a reset almost of how we're going to run our hospitality sector, how we're going to run restaurants. That's why I'm suggesting the idea of going back to the way things used to be done is perhaps not wise, and that we have this opportunity to reset. And I think we need to give that some serious consideration. Retail and wholesale. Retail is having a very difficult time because of the fact that much retail in Bermuda is in person. And that raises some serious risks for shoppers. And so making the transition to e-commerce, making the transition to contactless transactions is something that retail is going to have to deal with. It's going to revolutionize and totally change how retail is done in Bermuda. Um, I suspect that in 3 years' time, retail, the way it used to look, will be a thing of the past. Which means that the city of Hamilton will be a very different place. Right now, at ground level, we're used to seeing shops. I don't know that shops are going to be the thing that makes up the ground floors of the geography of Hamilton. Wholesale can largely continue as it has, and perhaps even grow. But retail has to go through a revolution of sorts, primarily to deal with the physical contact that's involved in retail. And indeed, we're seeing uh, new companies. I don't think I've ever seen so many new retail establishments created online in Bermuda in a year than in my entire lifetime. And most of those jobs in retail and wholesale are held by Bermudians, unlike in the restaurants. Construction, as I said, construction is largely back on its feet, um, and that is a very good thing. Transport, that's a difficult one to see how it can get back because it requires intimate contact between a driver and passengers. And so, when thinking about the taxi business or the minibuses, or indeed even public transportation, uh, the best perhaps that we can hope for is having it operating at somewhere between 25 and say 33% of what it was pre-pandemic. So, looking at the final, the far right column, median income. So that's essentially what differentiates blue from white collar. So when you look at the bottom panel, you see the salaries there are very different. And mind you, these are numbers from 2019. The latest figures are in fact higher. So for example, in international business, the median salary now is over $140,000. And these people in the bottom part of the table largely are able to work remotely. And so that's what I mean by we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And the government was wise to step in as quickly as it did in sort of April and May of last year to provide financial support to those people in the top of the table, the folks who are really in a different boat from people like me. And so that is something, the whole issue of inequality, uh, dealing with inequality or understanding the importance of inequality. This pandemic, I think, is changing the narrative. Um, a company like Unilever, a multinational corporation with something like 140,000 workers operating in over 100 companies. Um, Unilever, you would think a code calculated multinational corporation, has dedicated itself to offering all of its employees a living wage. And it's gone even further to say that by 2030, it will be offering a livable wage to all of its affiliate organizations. So that is pretty serious business. I mean, I suppose it's sort of similar to what happened after the bubonic plague in Europe, but that was not something that was voluntarily uh, done in terms of providing higher wages for peasants. In fact, laws were passed to stop peasants from getting uh, a better deal. Whereas perhaps we're more civilized now in the 21st century, companies are doing right by their employees, perhaps understanding that how your workers uh, feel about your company and caring for your workers is more important than perhaps these companies had initially thought. And so there seems to be a shift happening before our eyes. Um, I'm reminded of what I see happening in the international business sector, the number of internships that our students are seeing. I've been at Bermuda College for 30 years, and um, I've never seen the number of offers, the number of bridges that have been built between the international business sector and let's call it the lumpen proletariat of Bermuda. Um, why now? I think this is one of those watershed moments that forces people, nudges people to really think very differently about their neighbor, which is a good thing, a very good thing. I'm teaching a course on Monday nights, fully funded by the Association of, what is it, ABIR, the Association of Bermuda Insurers and Reinsurers. They decided to put this course on so that they could reach out to John and Janet Q. Public, offering internships, trying to get as many Bermudians as possible into the industry. Why wasn't that done before the pandemic? Well, arguably, the effort was started before, but it seems that since the pandemic, these businesses have doubled down. More about the recovery. So something I've noted, this particular graphic is looking at retail sales, and I apologize for how primitive my Excel skills are. Perhaps I can make it a little bigger. Yeah, maybe this is better. So on the vertical, we've got the retail sales index, and on the horizontal, maybe I could explain this. So the first digit, the 1-1, the 1 is the date, and the second one is the month. So that would be January 1st. This would be the third month, which would be March 1st. And then, well, March, April, May 1st, June, July 1st, August, September 1st, November 1st, and then at the end here is December. And I'll ask you to guess which one of these lines is for 2020. And I think most people would see that the orange looking line is for 2020 and the blue is for 2019. The giveaway, of course, is here because we remember in the third month, shelter in place kicked in and essentially retail sales took a dive like had never ever been seen before. Thing to note is that since May, there has been this recovery. And this is what I want to focus on is that since this point in August, retail sales have been above what they were pre-pandemic. Reason for that? Arguably, it's a lot of pent-up demand. Bermudians regularly take 180,000 vacations overseas, not staycations, overseas vacations. And so a lot of that money, if you will, is being spent on island. And that would help explain why this particular part of the line, the curve, if you will, is above the pre-pandemic level. Will this continue into 2021? Well, I think so. The momentum is there. It's interesting once you drill down into the various segments of retail sales, what's causing that growth? Well, obviously, food sales are up. The other one that's up big time, especially over the Christmas holiday, when you're looking at the difference between these two alcohol sales were just really off the chain. But besides that, Bermudians have been spending a significant amount on upgrading and remodeling their homes. And so that is another reason why the construction sector is doing so well. So there is this, the good news is that retail sales are up, that people are in fact spending money still, at least the ones in the white collar boat, they seem to be spending. And I have to suspect that people in the blue collar boat are doing some. But once we get people back to work in earnest, I think things will look a lot better. So that's the good news. And I've got a little bit more good news. So credit markets. These lines are looking at the deposits that are, basically savings. So red are savings deposits. And you will note that since the pandemic, it's moved up. So this would be the people in the white collar boat who are not taking their vacations. And so savings right now is about as high as it's been in a very long time. And so that's a very good thing. But that's not the best part of this picture. Best part is the blue line. So there was a time in Bermuda when we lost our mind, and that was back here in 2005. That would have been the year of the highest economic growth that we had seen, definitely in the 21st century and possibly ever in Bermuda. So that would have been the result of the three hurricanes, the three ladies, Katrina, Wilma, and possibly Rita. I stand to be corrected about the third lady in that trio. But that particular year meant or led to the inflow of billions of dollars into Bermuda, into the reinsurance sector. And because of the state of technology in Bermuda at that particular point in time in 2005, that money came in and created lots and lots of jobs. And so the economy grew by 6-7%. And we became like Tom Watson's turkeys. They believed that what was happening in 2005 would continue in 2006 and 2007 and 2008 and beyond. And so we started to place bets on the future being like the past. And that wasn't to be, because in the fall of 2007, 2008, there was a financial crisis. And that was the end of the party. And as Warren Buffett has been quoted as saying, when the tide goes out, you know who's swimming naked. And we found out very quickly who was swimming naked. And so the recession would have come sort of in this area here, but the momentum, you can think of an economy like a cruise ship. It cannot turn easily. So these loans, this momentum that was pushing the number and the value of loans up didn't slow down until well after the recession was on. So we topped $5 billion in loans. And I'm guessing that you're asking the question, how is it possible for the financial services sector, banks, to issue in excess of $5 billion, I think it's $5.1 billion worth of loans, when there's only this amount of money in the bank? Because you can see that before 2005, it was always the case that the loans, the blue line, was underneath the red line. And that's because banks kept a reserve. That's common sense. But something very different happened in 2005. And we got ourselves in a bit of a situation, as you will, if you will. And so that situation has been rectified, but you can see how long it took to rectify that situation. The banks, after encountering this sort of situation, this unfortunate situation, had to spend a lot of time deleveraging, decreasing their loans. And so now we're back to sort of saner times. And we got back to saner times just in time for the pandemic. We're now in a situation where businesses can, in fact, realistically get financing for their new business, for expanding their businesses. So this crossing over, this return to sane times, couldn't have come at a better time. Had it come in a situation like this, so had the pandemic come shortly after the financial crisis, things would have been very different. And so that is some very good news. With respect to the hospitality sector, going back to where we were, I did want to share with you something from the Bermuda Tourist Authority that looks at tourist spending. And I want to give you a sense of what's possible thinking about the hospitality sector. Now, it would appear that there's a lot of pent-up demand in the hospitality sector globally, and that people are eager to travel. And so once this sort of health situation is put to bed, or at least it becomes manageable, we should expect that travel will return, that there will be, very much like in Bermuda with retail sales, there's going to be a boom. And so I think we should be looking for a boom in the hospitality sector, but not in the way that we saw pre-pandemic. Because pre-pandemic, most of the tourists coming to our shores would have been on a cruise ship. And so looking at the people that came by boat in 2019, looking at how much on average they spent, $224.81. So we had all of these people flooding our shores, taking up our beaches, traveling on our public transportation, not spending a heck of a lot of money. Compare that with people who travel, the vacationers, who in 2019 are spending considerably more, $1,500, if you will, or if you're looking at all visitors, $1,400. There's a big difference between what an air arrival spends versus what a cruise ship passenger spends. And so I would argue that the reset, this opportunity to reset our tourism product back to what it looked like way back in ancient history in the 1990s, 1980s. And it seems that it takes a catastrophe for us to sort of reset and benefit. The catastrophe that I'm thinking of would have been the Achille Laurel. It was an Italian cruise ship that was boarded by some Palestinians. They did some nasty things to the Americans on board the ship. And the following year, we had our best year in tourism. And I would argue that we're sort of in that kind of place where we should be preparing for a very good year in tourism, but only after we get the health side of life under control. Mm-hmm. And so I see that it's 42 minutes past the hour. It's time for me to take your questions. Thank you.
Mr. Simmons, we invite you to make further commentary as you would like. Oh, we are seeing a question here, and here it is being indicated.
I don't know that we have a problem attracting new workers. international business is seeing a boom. I mean, there are billions of dollars coming into Bermuda right now, because of the pandemic. As well, there's a couple of there's say two reasons. There's the pandemic, and there's the hardening of the insurance market. And so there are billions of dollars coming in. The difference between the influx of capital into the insurance industry in 2021 versus 2005, 2006, after those three hurricanes, is that technology has changed in a major way. So back in 2005, the technology insurance-linked securities was still in its infancy. Nowadays, it's an acceptable part. It's a respectable part of the insurance landscape. And so these technologies mean that employment that we saw back in 2005, 2006 is not going to happen this time around. There will be increases in employment, but not on the scale that we saw back then. And so attracting people to the island, I'm assuming workers, or where will those workers go? I do believe that the international business sector will continue to grow, but it simply won't attract the number of people that it did in the early part of the 21st century. The idea that we need to go back to the sort of configuration between Bermudian and non-Bermudian workers in the hospitality sector, I'm not convinced that that is where we want to go, because remember that for the first, let's say, 18 years of the 21st century, the number of Bermudians involved in the labor force declined every single year, despite the fact that the labor force was growing. And so, like Unilever, making that shift and understanding that, you know what, we need to do things differently. I think we Bermudians need to consider doing things differently, especially how we run our hospitality sector, how we run our restaurants. As someone that loves to eat out, I become a little despondent when I go to a restaurant and I don't get any Bermudians serving me. I think this is a chance for us to think carefully about how we want to organize that particular sector. Now, we do need more people on island, many of whom which will be workers, but how that occurs, I'm not sure. I think it's something that has to happen organically. Just having people on island for the sake of having people on island, I don't know if that's the way we want to go. We need to come up with engines that will grow our economy. And as we grow our economy, we will get workers. And so I am hopeful that local entrepreneurs are going to provide that kind of energy. Now, I know that I'm being sort of naive, and but we need to diversify. We've been talking about diversification for the longest time. Diversification means doing something other than reinsurance, something other than fund management, something other than the trust business. And for the life of me, people just haven't come up with it. Well, why not bet on local entrepreneurs coming up with something? Now, there's a pretty good chance that most of the ideas that local entrepreneurs come up with will fail. That is the very nature of entrepreneurship. Most entrepreneurs don't make it. But that's not the point. The nature of entrepreneurship is that the few who do make the difference. And so whilst you may have 100 startups, you really only need a handful to succeed, to make a serious impact, a serious dent in our economy. And so I'm looking at organizations like BEDIC, Bermuda Economic Development Corporation. I'm looking at organizations like Ignite that are providing the seed capital for local entrepreneurs to come up with new ideas. Some of those ideas are already in place, like, or at least the seeds have been planted, literally. Vertical farming, solar arrays that will save us foreign currency. So this is a part, I think, of the pivot that will essentially make the Bermudian economy more robust, resilient, and sustainable. And a part of that process, I think, can lead to the attraction of new workers, building up our infrastructure such that Bermuda becomes an exporter of infrastructure services. Again, it's about reimagining Bermuda in a post-pandemic world, as opposed to going back to the way things used to be. Oh boy, I was hoping for an easier question. One of the reasons why I showed you the graphic of saving loans graphic was to suggest that we are in a good position to finance these small businesses. As I said, had the pandemic come shortly after the financial crisis, there would have been very little that, say, the banks could have done to assist. But now the banking fraternity is on firm ground, and I think in a real position to provide the debt financing that many small businesses need. What is really lacking is the equity financing, where someone with savings will say to an entrepreneur, look, this is not a loan. I want a share of the business. Of course, that would require the entrepreneur, the small or medium-sized enterprise entrepreneur, to cede some control of the business, share of the business, to the equity shareholder. And that sometimes is a difficult pill for entrepreneurs to swallow. But I would suggest that the debt pill is a bitter pill to swallow, because the person offering you the loan will be paid whether or not you make a profit or not, as opposed to equity partners only get paid if you do well. And so the equity partner has skin in the game, which I think is an important part of any economic system or life in general. You want to do business or go through life with people who have the same skin as you in the same game. I hope I've answered, since I do not have financial backing from our companies. Yeah, this is a very tough time. I mean, I've heard commentators liken this to a war. Tough time. And we have to believe that there is life at the end of the tunnel. And what I said at the very beginning is that the light is closely tied to the health of our people. And we need to focus on getting our people healthy so that we can, in fact, attract people to our island, because arguably that is a great way to sell Bermuda as a place that is COVID-free. Yes, alcohol. I didn't mention alcohol, but the part that I also saw grow was with respect to the hardware stores, home building. I do believe the most recent retail sales figures, the largest growth, perhaps for the last couple of months, has been in that particular sector. I can't remember the heading that appears in the retail sales index. But it speaks to the fact that the construction industry is growing. That will employ a lot of people. And that's just the kind of fuel that our economy needs right now, until such time as we can get the hospitality and the restaurant sector up. Now, I want to read this a little more closely because uh, Mr. McGinnis is a very good friend of mine. Okay. What a broad indicator. Okay, I need to read this more closely. Um, I would make the argument that the retail sales index, as it stands now, is a fairly broad indicator. Yes, I agree, Stephen. Food has been the main driver of retail sales. It's been consistent since shelter in place. But I would say again that I've been pleasantly surprised by um, the growth in spending on refurbishing homes, upgrading homes, and I put perhaps too much credence, too much weight in that particular sector. But when I look around the island, I see evidence of people in the construction industry working, and and for me, I think that is a real boon, a positive sign, at least something that will get us through, let's say, the next 6 to 9 to 12 months. Now, if we're still in this situation this time next year, uh, we will have to pivot yet again. But hopefully, um, we can get infection rates down, and we can begin to attract people uh, via the hospitality sector to the island, and via air arrivals, getting people into hotels, into guest houses, into Airbnbs, and get those people spending money. I think that should be the medium term goal. Thank you for that question, Stephen. Yes, this is a double-edged sword, remote working, because it begs the question, if remote working is going to be the new norm, why does a reinsurance company need an office in Bermuda? Why not just operate from the US or some other jurisdiction? Um, what I'm hearing from at least the reinsurance sector is that, largely because of the Bermuda Monetary Authority, how the BMA has conducted itself over the last 12 months, how they've been able to get what they need from the regulator uh, in quick time. They feel this sort of allegiance, this loyalty, or maybe it's just they're getting what they need from the sector. But for me, the greatest threat is that these businesses will just decide we don't need Bermuda in the way that we thought we needed Bermuda. Um, but that's only time will tell whether or not these businesses will reposition. Um, some of it will have to do with the cost in Bermuda. I think everyone knows that the cost of doing business in Bermuda is high. My sense is that these businesses will be able to cut costs by having people working remotely. You won't need as large a footprint in the city of Hamilton, so you may be able to get by with half the office space, which will make life cheaper for the business. So yes, it is a double-edged sword. But with respect to the digital nomads, I don't see them as competing against Bermudians. I think these folks are simply trying to escape a pandemic-infested environment, and that's another reason why getting infection rates down can supplement our hospitality industry, or give it a new leg. Because traditionally we think about business visitors, but business visitors traditionally are those folks that accompany the reinsurance executive. This idea of having digital nomads means they're only here to do whatever it is they would be doing in Boston or Bangalore, operating from Bermuda. And so I don't see that as a challenge to local workers, at least not to this point. And as for protections, because when you talked about protections, you made me think about the gig economy. And the gig economy doesn't offer much protection to people, and that's a concern. But arguably, because we're in the middle of a storm, now's not the time to be thinking about protections. Another way of thinking about the gig economy is that it offers diversification. It offers supplemental income to people that are home. And I wonder sometimes about regulation, or bad regulation. Thinking about the restaurant industry. Within the restaurant industry, they're always going out of business. And there are always restaurants opening up. And I sometimes think, wow, what would happen if we had regulations that governed the winding up and the creation of restaurants, that attempt at bringing stability to the restaurant business would probably create more instability by trying to create stability. Sometimes you need to allow instability to create stability. And so when I think about the gig economy, how it's basically sort of totally unregulated, that in fact, if you allow it to sort of play itself out, it will provide our people with jobs that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to have from the comfort of their homes. The other thing about regulation, you made me think about the reinsurance sector and the creation of the Insurance Act back in 1978. It is deliberately not overbearing. One of the reasons why Bermuda does so well in the reinsurance sector is because, thank goodness for this, the Americans overregulate their insurance industry. Every state has its own set of rules. Whereas in Bermuda, there seems to be a very cozy relationship between the reinsurer and the regulator. So I'm saying that all to say that there's two types of regulation. There's good regulation and there's bad. And unfortunately, we have a disproportionate share of bad regulation. And we see it, I think, in how local entrepreneurs are treated by the government, where it's a lot easier to set up a reinsurance company than it is to set up a restaurant or a construction business. And perhaps we need to take a page out of the Insurance Act, out of how we treat reinsurance businesses, and apply that same courtesy, that same respect to local entrepreneurs so that they can create diversification in the economy. Is there another question?
Given that we don't have one that is immediate to us, we might be coming closer to wrapping up, but I would like to ask of you, Mr. Simmons, to consider the potential for whether it be luxury cruise lines, a few of them, home porting in Bermuda, and what that means, not just for now, but long term.
Yes. When I read the article, I saw the let's say the upside of having Bermuda as a home port, And I believe the number that I saw was that we could earn an additional $40 million.
Yes.
Okay. What wasn't stated or even hinted at was the downside. And in a COVID world, there is significant downside. And when I think about the cruise ship industry, if there is something that's going to be a catastrophe or a fatality of the pandemic, I think it is the cruise industry.
Mm.
The cruise industry, the way it works, the idea of having thousands of people crowded in a small space, that just doesn't seem to be an idea that has any legs in a post-pandemic world. Now, they did mention these luxury ships, which are smaller, but in terms of having a large number of people in a small space, there seems to be some significant downside risks to having these folks on island and then spending time on island. So I'm hoping that people will think the downside risks through and in fact openly debate the downside risks. We were given information about the upside, $40 million. I get that. But I would really like a closer inspection of the downside associated with having these cruise ships come through.
Indeed, with the thought that we can't leap from panacea back and forth to pandemic.
Yes.
Not for the sake of wordplay, but for the sake of human life.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Simmons, we are most grateful to have you on this evening for conversation, for discussion with those who have posted questions. And we look forward to much more of this with you and, of course, other of our colleagues, our esteemed colleagues at Bermuda College, plus those in the community. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Professor Toleran. And good night to you.
And good night. And good night to our viewers. Thank you so much for being aboard.